You have a lot of opinions for someone who has never sat alone with most of them. And that might sound harsh, but I don't mean it fully as an attack, because I myself do it too. Everyone in a whole, humanity does it, and it's almost the water that we swim in this day and age. You can watch somebody say something, watch somebody sharp or somebody who you believe is a genius, and it may sound well put together and it may land in your mind. Therefore, some hours later, you're regurgitating a version of it to someone else in your own words or your own tonality and feel as if that's your knowledge now. It has the texture of a thought that you made up, but you did not have the thought. That is the key distinction. You are not the originator of the thought. Instead, you are just the person who rephrased someone else's thought. All you're doing is receiving it. And to put it basically, you're pretty much an efficient courier in a position who never actually has been tested for anything at any point. You've never been tested against anything that has actually happened to you. You are just the messenger. You're not the person who thinks of the message. And the messenger has never been tested to see if the messenger can actually come up with any thoughts of their own, right? Because the messenger's one job is to take this letter from here to there. And somehow, most of the time, you'll never actually get found out because the person you're saying these things to, the person you're regurgitating this knowledge to, is doing the exact same thing, passing along their own borrowed fright. And the two of you can have almost an entire conversation made of nothing that either of you actually own. It's honestly astonishing. Now, Socrates, he spent his whole life on this topic. He studied it deeply. And eventually, it's the same topic that got him killed. It was not the caricature under it, but not even just the annoying man in the marketplace asking the questions, but instead the thing underneath the whole thing, right? It was the fact that he would walk up to people who were almost completely certain about their courage or their opinions on courage or their opinions on justice or virtue for years and years, and he would ask them just what they meant. And none of them were able to actively respond to him. They had their opinions on those things, on justice, virtue, yada, yada, yada. They had their opinion for decades. They've been formulating it, or at least they thought they were, for years, like I said. They just never once looked directly at the opinion to see what made it up. And the few questions in, after Socrates asked them a few questions about their so-called dedicated opinions, he pretty much realized that the whole thing was coming apart in their hands. And what bothered those people was not that they were wrong, but instead the fact that they discovered now that they have been carrying something so heavy with themselves for their entire life, and they never stopped once to open it and read what was inside of it. Now, Socrates had this line about the unexamined life not being worth living, which has been quoted so many times that, in my opinion, it's gone soft as a quote. But when you sit with what he actually meant one time, when you try and figure out what that phrase actually means as opposed to what it looks like on the surface, obviously not that you should think harder, but instead that, an opinion that you've never examined isn't really yours. And a life that you've built out of opinions that you've never examined isn't yours either. Instead, it's a life that you're actively renting from everyone around you or everyone you've ever half listened to, all the podcasts, all the YouTube videos, etc., right? And it's not as if I'm a saint preaching to you guys as if you have to convert, right? I catch myself doing the same thing, which I supposedly care about the most. I talk about it often, and I'll notice that I have a pretty firm position on something, and then realize that I could not, if pressed about that thing, if pressed about whatever it was, just like Socrates would do in the market, tell you where it actually came from or what the opinion is standing on or whether I actually believe in it or whether I myself arrived in it or if I just absorbed it from someone I liked, whether I've actually run any stress tests of that thing in my mind against any single real thing in my own life or just nodded along moving towards the day of reckoning at the right moment until that idea is then calcified into a belief. And in my opinion, it's a lot worse now than it ever actually has been in existence, because you can assemble your entire personality out of just consumption. Before, what were you going to do? Go to a play, look at some dude wearing a mask and acting this way and base your entire life off of him. No, right? But now you can go to YouTube, you can watch movies. I've seen so many people who think they're fucking Brad Pitt from Fight Club because they watched it. I've seen so many people who think they're the dude Kami from The Bear just because they watched the show and they think that that's how life is going to end up being. And that's just TV. Then you have books, then you have like everything. You have sports, you have music, everything about it. If you watch the right people, if you read the right threads, and to an extent you feel as if you can sound thoughtful enough or sound, I guess, in some way articulate enough, that's the word I was looking for, about anything without actually having done any of the thinking, that is a trap. And you're blind if you can't see it that way after I've laid it out in front of you. The consuming itself feels as if it is the thinking. That is the entire facade. And you end up mistaking the intake, you end up making the mistake of characterizing the intake of consumption, the intake of content, oh my God, I can't speak, as the work itself. You feel as if you are a genius after watching 100 smart people talking about the same topic. And then some of it starts to come out of your mouth, even though you don't know what you're actually saying. And then you feel sharp. You feel like a good guy. You feel like someone who studied for years upon years just because you watched a couple YouTube videos. You feel as if you are a person with their own freely running mind, when all you have gotten good at is retransmitting someone else's message. Now, Kant, he also had this phrase, which was dare to know. That was pretty much his whole answer to what it even means at all to grow up intellectually. It is not to acquire more information, but instead to have the nerve to use your own head instead of borrowing everyone else's. And the reason that people don't do this, he thought, or at least he stated, was not because of stupidity, but instead because borrowing is much more comfortable and thinking is a lot more frightening. The second you actually start to examine a belief that you believe is your own, you might lose it. It might disappear because it starts to fall apart in your mind. And then where do you end up? You stand there without anything, without the thing that you had been leaning on the entire time just because you chose to think about it. In my opinion, that's the unspoken part about this whole thing. Testing the belief itself is what risks the belief. You may sit down with something that you've said so confidently and preached for years. You may honestly be unwilling to change just because of how long you've been on the side of this one topic. And then you might find nothing underneath it when you actually try to examine it and end up being forced to put it down before having the option to put it down. And eventually that will lead to you standing there feeling emptier than before. And that emptiness does feel like a loss. It's pretty undeniable, even though it's the first honest thing that has happened to you in a while. There is the good side to it, that you could see it as a start of something new. You could see it as the change, your new life. I don't think the answer to this dilemma is to have fewer opinions, however, or even just to stop listening to people who you know are more qualified to know these things than you. But instead, I think it's more that there is a difference between a thought and a difference between, or at least a thought you've had and a thought that you've held. There's a difference between the two. And almost everything that almost all of us carry, if not everyone, is that second kind. The thought that you've held onto instead of the thought that you created yourself. It's as if you take a software off a shelf and act like it's your own, when in reality all it is a repackaged, purchased product. So if you never end up examining it and you go your entire life like that, you go your entire life living as a repackaged product without ever examining what's actually in the product, you cannot mistake that for having a mind. So either make the distinction now or make the change now. In my opinion, you should choose one. You shouldn't be struck between two. Just choose one thing that you are certain of right now and actually go into it and look at where it came from and the thought basis behind the thought and whether or not it's actually yours and whether or not it survives you looking at it. And the thing is, most of the things that you choose won't survive that, which somehow ends up not being the bad news, but instead is the whole point behind it.